The ledger. Leo Thorne knelt on the stone floor of the library crypt, with the confession paper falling from his trembling fingers, watching Professor Sterling's shadow tower over him like a permanent eclipse. In 6 months, he would stand at graduation, holding a letter that would shatter everything he believed about that moment. But tonight, as rain lashed against the basement windows and footsteps echoed down the stairs, he only knew that he had lost. 13 hours earlier, Leo stood in the hallway outside Dr. Julian Sterling's office, adjusting the heavy leather straps of his backpack. The hallway smelled of old paper and furniture polish, the kind of smell that had become familiar to him over 3 years at St. Jude's University. His hand trembled slightly as he raised it to knock on the dark oak door with its brass nameplate. Dr. Julian Sterling, Head of Humanities. Inside, muffled classical music played. Something Baroque, probably Bach. Leo had never been certain if Sterling played it for atmosphere or simply because he didn't realize how thin the door was. He knocked 3 times, each rap hollow and deliberate on the wood. The knocking seemed to take forever to receive a response. When it came, it was not a word but a sound. The gentle click of a door handle, and then the hinges swung inward silently. Professor Sterling sat behind his sprawling mahogany desk, positioned so that the window light fell across the papers in front of him, but left his face in shadow. He wore a charcoal turtleneck and silver-rimmed glasses that caught the gray afternoon light. His fountain pen continued scratching across a sheet of beige parchment, as if Leo had not entered at all. 5 minutes, Leo, Sterling said without looking up. Precision is the soul of scholarship. Leo crossed the Persian rug carefully, aware of how his footsteps seemed louder than they should be on such thick fabric. He placed the manila folder on the desk, his thesis draft titled Psychogeography of the Urban. As he set it down, his eyes caught on something that made him pause. A framed photograph on Sterling's desk, turned face down. Leo had never seen that frame before. Or perhaps he had. But Sterling had always kept it hidden, angled away from view. Sterling finally looked up, his dark eyes assessing Leo over the rims of his glasses. "The introduction needs tightening," he said. "You're making assumptions about Lefebvre that would make him weep." Leo was about to respond when the sound came. A frantic pounding on the office window. Leo jumped, his shoulders jerking up toward his ears. Through the triple-pane glass, on the narrow third-floor ledge outside, there was a boy. He looked no more than 15, wearing a school uniform that was torn and dirty. His face was streaked with tears, his palms pressed hard against the glass as he pounded. "Professor, there's someone," Leo began. The boy's mouth was moving, but the window sealed out all sound. His lips formed words that Leo could almost read. "Help me," and then "please," and then something that looked like a name. Sterling's chair scraped backward with a soft whisper of wood on carpet. He rose without urgency, walked to the window, and with one smooth motion pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut. The metal rings on the rod shrieked as they slid. The room plunged into shadow, lit now only by the green banker's lamp on Sterling's desk. "A drama student looking for attention," Sterling said, his voice unchanged. "They're always performing something, Leo. Sit down. We have work." Leo sat, but he found himself unable to concentrate on Sterling's critique of his thesis. The image of the boy's face, pale, desperate, formed in the glass like a phantom, remained etched in his mind. He kept glancing toward the curtains, seeing the faint shadow of movement beyond them. Then stillness. When the meeting ended 20 minutes later, Leo gathered his folder and left. He told himself he would check on the boy. He told himself it was probably nothing. He told himself this as he descended the 3 flights of stairs to the ground floor, as he exited through the side door, and as he made his way around the building toward the spot where the ledge would be. The narrow concrete alley behind the Humanities building was empty. The wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the wet pavement. Leo jogged deeper into the shadows between buildings, his breath visible in the cold air. "Hey," he called out. "Is anyone here?" The alley seemed to swallow his voice. He stopped at a pile of discarded wooden pallets, stacked haphazardly near a row of industrial dumpsters. The orange glow of the sodium lamp above cast everything in an unnatural, sickly light. That was when Leo heard the footsteps, not the light, hurried footsteps of someone in distress, but the heavy, measured tread of boots. 2 men stepped out from behind one of the dumpsters. They wore black security uniforms with patches that read SJ Security in crisp white letters. The patches looked brand new, no fading, no wear. The taller man had a buzz cut and a long scar that ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw. He carried a black telescopic baton. When he saw Leo, the man smiled. It was not a friendly expression. Well, the tall one said. His voice was gravelly, roughened like he had once swallowed gravel and never fully recovered. "Curiosity killed the cat, kid. Professor says you're off limits for tonight." Leo turned to run, but the second man, shorter, with a thick beard and the kind of broad chest that suggested he'd spent a lot of time in a gym, grabbed the back of Leo's leather backpack. Leo was jerked backward, his heels skidding on the wet asphalt. Leo swung his elbow back hard, driving it into what he hoped was the man's solar plexus. The grunt he received suggested he'd found his target. The grip on his backpack loosened for just a moment, but it was enough. The tall man snapped his wrist. The telescopic baton extended with a sharp snick, the steel sliding out with the kind of precision that suggested the man had done this many times. He swung at Leo's knees. Leo rolled across the pavement, his shoulder hitting the brick wall of the building. Pain shot through his arm, but adrenaline was already flooding his system, sharpening everything. He scrambled to his feet and grabbed a heavy glass beer bottle from the scattered trash. He brought it down hard against the edge of the dumpster, and the bottle shattered, leaving him holding the jagged neck. "Stay back," Leo shouted. His voice cracked. "I'll call the cops." The 2 men looked at each other. One of them laughed, a low, dangerous sound that suggested they had heard threats like this many times before, and had learned long ago not to fear them. The tall man lunged. Leo slashed out with a jagged bottleneck, more instinct than strategy. The glass caught the man's forearm as he raised it to block, tearing through the security jacket and the skin beneath. The man yelped and jerked back, blood streaming down his wrist. Leo didn't wait to see what happened next. He bolted for the service door that led into the science building, yanked it open, and threw himself inside. He spun around and threw the deadbolt, hearing it click home just as something heavy slammed against the other side. The metal door shook but held. Leo stood in the dark hallway, breathing hard, his entire body trembling. Behind him, he could hear shouting, cursing, and the sound of a radio crackling. He took a step back, then another, moving deeper into the building. He was bleeding from his shoulder. His knuckles were cut from the glass, and he had no idea why 2 security guards, supposedly employed by his own university, had tried to stop him from helping a boy in distress. It was close to 11 o'clock when Leo finally made it back to his dorm room. He peeled off his torn shirt and examined the damage in the mirror above his desk. The scrape on his shoulder was angry and red, weeping blood. He wrapped a bandage around it, his movements mechanical, his mind elsewhere. On his desk sat the wooden metronome that Professor Sterling had given him 3 weeks earlier as a gift to help with focus during deep work. Leo had always appreciated it. The steady tick-tock was genuinely soothing, a reliable rhythm that helped him think. He kept it running almost constantly, the pendulum swinging back and forth with metronomic precision. Tonight, as Leo sat on his bed in his underwear and his undershirt, he found himself staring at the device with a kind of dread he couldn't quite name. The tick-tock continued, steady as a heartbeat. But there was something off about it. One of the clicks was ever so slightly different, a fraction of a second off from the others. Leo leaned in closer, tilting his head. That was when he saw it. A microscopic pinhole just above the 120 BPM marking on the metronome's face. And inside that pinhole, barely visible unless you were looking directly at it, was a tiny red light that flickered once every 3 seconds. Leo's stomach dropped. He grabbed a screwdriver from the junk drawer by his bed and began prying at the wooden back of the metronome. The wood splintered under the blade, and he worked it free, careful not to damage whatever was inside. When the back came away, Leo found himself staring not at the intricate clockwork mechanism he'd expected, but at something entirely different. A high-capacity lithium battery, a 5G transmitter, a wide-angle camera lens, and printed on the circuit board, in tiny letters, was a company logo. Sterling Security Systems. Leo's hands began to shake violently. He grabbed his laptop, inserted the micro SD card he found beneath the battery, and waited for the folder to load. Hundreds of files appeared on the screen, video files. Each one was labeled with a date and a designation. Target, Leo, 07:14 morning. Target, Leo, 07:14 evening. Target, Leo, 07:15 sleep cycle. He clicked on one at random. His own face filled the screen, taken from an angle that would have been directly above the metronome's normal position on his desk. In the video, past Leo was sleeping, his face peaceful, his chest rising and falling. The timestamp showed it was from 10 minutes ago. Leo closed that file quickly and scrolled down through the list. Months of surveillance. Months of being watched while he slept, while he dressed, while he sat at his desk working on the thesis Sterling had been so carefully critiquing. At the bottom of the SD card, Leo found a different folder marked Archive Previous. He opened it, and his blood turned to ice water. There were dozens of names listed. Students, Leo assumed. Each entry included psychological profile data, behavioral notes, dates. Some entries ended with a single word in red text. Terminated. And there, near the bottom of the list, was the name Toby Miller, terminated. The boy from the window. The faculty gala was being held in the main ballroom of the administration building. Leo had managed to borrow an oversized tuxedo from a friend. The jacket hung on him like a tent, the pants bunching around his ankles. And he slipped through the crowd unnoticed. Jazz music wailed from the orchestra in the corner. Faculty members in evening wear mingled with donors and board members, their laughter sharp and brittle. Leo needed to get to the archives. He found a side fire exit and ducked out into the cool evening air. The archive wing was a modern structure of glass and steel, looking thoroughly out of place against the older academic buildings that surrounded it. Leo kept to the shadows, moving across the dark lawn toward the service entrance on the building's north side. The keypad glowed softly in the darkness. Leo had memorized Sterling's birthday. It was written on the faculty bulletin board, a tradition at the university to acknowledge birthdays with cake and awkward speeches. He punched in the numbers, 0911-8. The light flashed green. The door clicked open. Inside, the hallway was sterile and cold, lit by fluorescent panels and marked with blue floor stripes that presumably led somewhere important. Leo moved quickly, his oversized tuxedo making soft whooshing sounds as he walked. That was when the flashlight beam caught him. A security guard in a black uniform rounded the corner, his expression shifting instantly from bored to alert. "Hey, restricted area," he shouted, reaching for his radio. Leo didn't hesitate. He ran toward the spiral staircase at the end of the hallway, his borrowed shoes slapping against the floor. Behind him, he could hear the guards' heavy boots, the radio crackling with urgent commands being issued to other guards. Leo reached the staircase and made a split-second decision. Instead of running down, he grabbed the railing and slid down the banister, using gravity to accelerate faster than any normal descent would allow. At the bottom, his feet hit the floor, and he barely had time to register the guard lunging for him before Leo twisted out of his jacket like a snake shedding skin. The guard was left holding empty fabric. Leo grabbed a heavy book trolley and shoved it toward the guard. The man's legs caught on it, and he went down in a tangle of limbs, books scattering across the floor like autumn leaves. Leo ran through a heavy steel door marked Restricted, Dore, Sterling's private collection, and slammed the lever down on the other side, locking it. He could hear the guard's heavy body slamming against the door, testing it, then slamming again. The metal reverberated with each impact. Leo grabbed a mahogany filing cabinet and shoved it in front of the door, bracing it. The thumping continued, but more slowly now, with less urgency. Leo backed away from the door, his chest heaving. The room was dark, except for the pale light filtering through a small window. Leo found a light switch and flicked it. The overhead panels illuminated, revealing rows upon rows of ancient scrolls, leather-bound books, and archival documents that looked like they belonged in a museum, rather than a university office. In the center of the room stood a modern safe with a biometric scanner. Leo approached it slowly. On the scanner's surface, barely visible, was a thin piece of clear silicone film. A lifted fingerprint. Sterling's fingerprint. Leo pressed his own thumb against the film, positioning his thumb pad over where Sterling's had been. The safe beeped, and a red light turned green. The heavy door clicked open. Inside was a single black notebook and a stack of bank statements. Leo opened the notebook with trembling fingers. The first page read, Product, Leo Thorne. Psychological profile. Vulnerable to authority. High IQ. Isolated, limited social support system. Excellent candidate for Phase 2 integration. Above the text was a company logo. A stylized apex, a triangle pointing upward, with the words, Apex Behavioral Solutions, in modern sans serif font. He's not a teacher, Leo whispered to himself. He's a scout. Leo flipped through the notebook, his understanding of his entire relationship with Professor Sterling cracking like thin ice. Page after page contained notes about his behavior, his reactions, his emotional states. Sterling had documented everything, not as a mentor, but as an experimenter observing a subject. At the back of the notebook, Leo found a contract dated 5 years earlier. It was signed by Julian Sterling and Dr. Aries, the president of the university. The document outlined an arrangement. The university would serve as a human behavior testing ground for Apex Solutions. In exchange, Apex would provide substantial funding to the university, channeled through what appeared to be a series of dummy corporations. The students, it seemed, were the product. Leo heard the sound of a saw beginning somewhere outside the locked door. The guard had called for equipment. They would be through soon. He stuffed the notebook and the bank statements into the waistband of his pants, covering them with his oversized tuxedo shirt. He looked up and saw a ventilation shaft in the ceiling, small, but large enough for a determined person to squeeze through. He grabbed a nearby chair, climbed up, and pressed his hands against the metal grate. The roof of the archive wing was flat and covered in gravel that crunched beneath Leo's feet as he crawled out of the ventilation shaft. He was covered in gray dust, and his borrowed tuxedo was in tatters. But he was out. Behind him, he could hear the sound of the service door being cut open. Leo ran to the edge of the roof and looked down. 40 feet of empty air and then concrete. There was no fire escape, no ladder, no way down. The roof access door burst open, and 3 security guards emerged, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like sabers. "Stop right there, kid," one of them shouted. Leo backed toward the edge of the roof, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pulled the notebook out from his waistband and held it over the edge. Far below, he could see the smoking chimney pipe of the library's incinerator, its opening dark and hungry. "One step closer, and this drops into the incinerator vent below," Leo called out. The guards stopped. Then, from behind them, a figure emerged. Professor Sterling. He was still dressed in his formal tuxedo from the gala, but he was holding a heavy black umbrella like a weapon. His face was eerily calm, his dead eyes assessing Leo with the practiced detachment of someone evaluating data. "Leo," Sterling said, his voice smooth as silk. "You were my star pupil. Don't ruin your transcript with a suicide." "I'm not suicidal," Leo said. "I'm just done." "Are you?" Sterling took a step forward, the umbrella held loosely in one hand. "You have 10 minutes, Leo. 10 minutes until the guards get permission to use force. After that, none of this matters. The notebook, the evidence, your noble gesture, it all becomes irrelevant." He pulled out a silver pocket watch and flicked it open. "Choose your next move carefully." Leo looked at the notebook in his hands, then at the incinerator vent below. He looked at Sterling's face, searching for something. Some sign that the man he'd respected for 3 years still existed somewhere beneath the mask. He found nothing. Leo stepped backward. The gravel crumbled beneath his heel as he went over the edge. Leo didn't fall into the incinerator. Instead, he fell through its maintenance hatch, a delivery opening for refuse that had been left slightly ajar. He crashed onto a pile of unburned exam papers, the wind knocked out of him, his ribs screaming in protest. The pit around him was a metal chamber, walls hot to the touch, the air shimmering with heat. Below him, he could hear the roar of gas burners, could feel the temperature rising. The papers beneath him were yellowed and brittle, decades of failed examinations and rejected thesis proposals. Leo pushed himself to his feet, gasping. That was when the figure dropped down from above, landing in front of him with the grace of someone who had made this descent many times before. It was the tall security guard from the alley, the one with the scarred chin. The wound Leo had given him with the beer bottle was bandaged, his arm wrapped in white gauze. He wore a heat-resistant mask that made him look alien, and he was holding a heavy iron poker with the casual grip of someone who knew how to use it. "No bottle to save you here, kid," the guard said, his voice muffled by the mask. He swung the poker. Leo ducked, rolling to his left as the metal whistled past his head. He grabbed a handful of loose paper and threw it at the guard's mask, aiming for the ventilation vents. The paper caught, and the guard coughed, momentarily blinded. Leo didn't waste the opportunity. He launched himself at the man's waist, driving him backward. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs, papers flying around them like snow. The guard's grip on the poker loosened, and Leo wrenched it away, throwing it to the side. The guard was strong, but Leo had adrenaline and the desperation of the hunted. Leo pinned the guard's burned arm against a scalding steam pipe. The man screamed, his skin sizzling, and Leo grabbed the guard's head and struck him in the temple with the base of his palm. The guard went limp. Leo stood there for a moment, breathing hard, staring at the unconscious man at his feet. Then he grabbed the iron poker and used it to pry open the jammed main exit door of the incinerator chamber. Metal shrieked as it gave way. He stumbled out into the basement hallway, clutching the notebook, his entire body covered in soot and sweat and blood. The old library crypt was located in the basement of one of the oldest buildings on campus. A stone vault from the 1800s that had once housed the university's entire collection of manuscripts. These days, it was mostly abandoned, visited occasionally by graduate students looking for a quiet place to work. Leo knew about it because Maya had shown him the place 3 months earlier. Maya, his only real friend at the university. Maya, who wore thick glasses and a yellow sweater and had a tendency to make terrible jokes that somehow always made Leo laugh. Maya was waiting for him in the shadows, a laptop open on her knees, a first aid kit on the stone beside her. "Leo," she cried out, running to him. "You're alive, thank God." Leo handed her the notebook without speaking. He was too exhausted to explain, too wired on adrenaline to do anything but collapse against the cold stone pillar behind them. Maya opened the notebook and started typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll upload this to every news outlet I can find. They won't be able to bury this, not with the evidence." Leo looked down at her wrist. She was wearing a watch, a platinum chronograph with the name Sterling Edition engraved on the back. It was identical to the one Sterling wore. Just tests. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, and Professor Sterling emerged into the dim light of the crypt, flanked by 4 guards in matching uniforms. He was still wearing his tuxedo, but now it was torn and damp with rain. His composure, however, was as perfect as ever. He even took a moment to wipe an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve with a silk handkerchief. "Look at you," Sterling said, shaking his head with what might have been genuine disappointment. "A bright boy reduced to a common thief, all for a ledger you don't even understand." Leo pulled the thumb drive out of his pocket, the one he'd managed to swap for the notebook while Maya had been typing, hiding it in his sock. "It's all here," he said. "The Apex contracts, the testing, Toby Miller, everything." Sterling laughed. It was a short, barking sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Leo, think bigger. Who do you think owns SJ Security? Who owns the servers at the local police station? Who runs the city council?" Leo said nothing. "Apex Behavioral Solutions is the university," Sterling continued, stepping into the light cast by the crypt's single hanging bulb. "And I am Apex. I have been Apex for the last 15 years. There is no organization to expose. There is no criminal conspiracy that doesn't reach someone in a position of power. You understand that, don't you?" Sterling pulled out a tablet and turned it toward Leo. On the screen was a live video feed. Leo's mother's house. Her car was in the driveway, and parked at the curb, waiting, was a sedan with Apex Security printed on its side. "Don't be a hero, Leo," Sterling said softly. "Heroes have grieving parents." Leo dropped the thumb drive. It clattered on the stone floor, bouncing once, then lying still. He dropped to his knees. The office of President Aris was on the top floor of the administration building, and it looked like the kind of place where important decisions were made. Dark wood panels, oil paintings of old dead benefactors, shelves full of leather-bound books that no one had ever read. Leo sat in a hard chair in the center of the room, still in his filthy, torn tuxedo. President Aris sat behind her massive desk, a woman in her 70s wearing a silk suit the color of ash. Sterling stood by the window, looking out at the rain. A confession document lay on the desk. It stated that Leo had stolen university property, broken into restricted areas, and assaulted security personnel. It was written in legal language so dense that Leo could barely parse it. But the gist was clear. Sign this, and he would be treated as mentally ill rather than criminal. His mother would not be hurt. His life, such as it was, would continue. Sign it, Leo, Iris said, her voice carrying the false warmth of a therapist. We'll say you had a mental breakdown. You'll be treated, not jailed. You'll get better, and then you'll move on with your life. Quietly, gratefully. Leo reached for the pen. It was heavy, a Mont Blanc in silver, the kind of pen that important people use to sign important documents. His hand froze. On the shelf behind Iris's desk sat a smart speaker. A small cylindrical device with a blue ring denoting it was listening. Leo had written a paper about these devices last year, about their vulnerabilities, their security flaws, how easy it was to exploit them if you knew the right commands. He'd written that paper for Sterling's class. Leo spoke clearly, each word enunciated with precision. Echo. Broadcast to campus alert system. Sterling's head snapped around. Iris lunged for the speaker, but Leo kicked the mahogany desk hard enough to slide it across the floor, blocking her path. The speaker's blue ring turned purple, indicating it was now broadcasting. This is Leo Thorne, Leo said into the air. Professor Sterling and President Iris are selling student psychological data to Apex Solutions. Check server room 4B for the backup ledger. The access code is Sterling's birthday, 091448. The speaker's ring pulsed purple as Leo's voice traveled through the campus's PA system, echoing through hallways and offices and dormitory rooms. Sterling lunged for Leo, his hand reaching for the boy's throat. But the office door was kicked open, and people poured in. Students, dozens of them, still dressed in the clothes they'd worn to the gala. At their head was the boy from the window, Toby Miller. And he was holding a phone, recording everything. Sterling forced Leo out onto the narrow balcony that overlooked the campus grounds. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind was strong enough to make the stones slippery beneath their feet. Sterling had grabbed a fire axe from somewhere. Leo didn't even see where. And he was swinging it at Leo with the kind of fury that came from a carefully constructed life, beginning to crumble. I made you, Leo, Sterling screamed over the wind. I made you. I'll unmake you. Leo dodged the first swing, rolling to the side as the axe head whistled past his ear. The blade lodged deep in the wooden doorframe. Sterling tugged at it, his face purple with effort, his expensive tuxedo already torn and stained. That was when Leo made his move. He stepped in close, used the move he'd learned in the university's mandatory self-defense seminar. A precision strike to the throat that Sterling himself had taught him years ago. Sterling gasped, his hands going to his neck. Leo swept his legs. Sterling's feet came out from under him. He fell hard onto the wet stone, his fingers scrambling for purchase as he slid toward the edge of the balcony. His expensive cufflinks caught in the moss that grew on the ancient stone. And he was left hanging half over the edge, his body dangling above the 30-foot drop to the ground below. Leo stood over him, holding the confession paper in one hand. He looked down at his former mentor, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as a brilliant professor or a cunning villain, but as a man at the end of his rope. You taught me everything about psychogeography, Professor, Leo said. You taught me that terrain shapes behavior, that geography creates destiny. You forgot one thing. Sterling's fingers slipped further on the moss. The terrain always wins, Leo finished. He reached down and grabbed Sterling by the collar, hauling him back onto the solid stone of the balcony. He didn't do it out of mercy. He didn't do it out of any sense of justice. He did it because he wanted Sterling to face the jury, to answer for what he had done, to be held accountable in the daylight instead of swept away into the darkness where he had operated for so long. Behind them, the police burst through the office door, their weapons drawn, their voices shouting commands to put hands up, to move away from the edge, to lay flat on the ground. 6 months later, Leo stood in a graduation gown at a different university, one that had accepted him despite his complicated history, or perhaps because of it. The diploma in his hand felt surreal, a piece of paper that shouldn't have existed given the trajectory of the previous year. The prosecutor's office had sent him a box of personal effects from Sterling's cell. Most of it was worthless. Old books, some pens, photographs. But there was also a small, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age, its handwriting the familiar, elegant script of Professor Sterling. Leo opened it on a bench in the campus garden, with the bright sun warming his face and the sound of graduation music drifting across the grass. He found the entry he was looking for, dated 10 years earlier, when Sterling would have been only 5 years older than Leo was now. The entry read, "Leo Thorne shows the same signs I did. The same vulnerability to authority, the same hunger for approval, the same isolation that made me such perfect prey. If I don't pressure him, if I don't become the monster he needs to defeat, Apex will recruit him themselves, and he won't survive it like I did. I must betray the ones I love to save them." Leo read the words again, then again. On the bench beside him, a photograph had fallen from the envelope. It showed a younger Sterling with his arm around a boy who had to be Leo, taken during freshman year. On the back, in Sterling's handwriting, were 4 simple words: "A+ on your final exam, Leo." Leo picked up the photograph and turned it over, studying the faces of the mentor and student frozen in time. He looked at the watch on his wrist, the platinum Sterling edition chronograph that Sterling had given him years ago. He lifted it to his ear and listened to its steady ticking. He reached up and tapped the watch face twice, like a salute. Then he folded the photograph, slipped it into his graduation cap, and stood up. Around him, other graduates in their gowns were moving across the lawn, moving toward their families, moving toward whatever came next. Leo walked away from the bench, his footsteps steady and sure on the grass, his shadow stretching long behind him in the afternoon sun. The diploma hung at his side. The photograph was hidden in his cap. Above him, the sky was perfectly clear and perfectly blue. And when he tapped his watch face one more time at exactly noon, the seconds aligned with the bells that tolled across the campus, marking the moment with precision, creating order from the chaos of the previous 6 months, transforming survival into something that might, if you looked at it from the right angle, resemble something close to a future. The watch ticked on, its mechanism perfect and precise. The legacy of a man who had taught Leo that the world was made of patterns and pressure, of surveillance and systems, of betrayals that might be protection, all arranged on the landscape like pieces on a game board, waiting to be read by those with eyes sharp enough to see them.